Hey everybody, so I mentioned in the last video that we're getting power in. I think at that time it was a little later in the week. It's in now, and it's actually been kind of weird getting used to it because we're so used to going over and starting a generator to get water. But now you can just turn on a faucet. So right now it's still pretty janky, but we have quite a bit to do on the irrigation system now that it's in. But we do have a frost-free hydrant that we can go ahead and get water from. So it's not quite as convenient as it was when we could get all the water at once and just do one big irrigation, but it's nice because we can just water a little bit at a time, and it's not a huge rush for everybody to water all at once when those pumps are running. So big deal for us to get that in. We had a huge trench that we dug earlier in the spring. Actually, I think it was maybe even in early summer. I think we put that in late June, and we thought the ground was going to be dry. I brought in a trencher, and we went down. We're trying to go 36 inches for that trench, so just reducing the risk of running into it later when we're digging and stuff around the farm. But we hit a bunch of mud once we got past 24 inches or so, and so most of the line ended up going closer to 24 inches, which I think will work out. I took careful measurements and pictures about exactly where the line is, and I'll go ahead and do a map. All the utilities, whether it be irrigation pipe and electrical and anything else that we're putting in the ground, we make sure that we take a pretty careful record on, so we don't lose track of those things. So what's next? I need to get the filtration in for the new irrigation pump. We don't have that hooked up yet. It's hooked up to the power, so it will run, but it doesn't have the water hooked in. I have set it up, so I just have to reconfigure it from what will be our temporary pump, the gas pump, over to the new irrigation pump. So that part's pretty easy, basically done, just switching that around. But we do need to hook up some filtration. I have these large filters that they'll be hooking into the line. They do kind of a progressive filtration. I can't remember the exact numbers for the lower one, but it's something like a 50 or 60 mesh, and then it goes to 100 and something, and then a 155, which tends to be the peak of what most of our irrigation lines, whether it be drip emitters or sprinklers, use on the farm. Then we do have smaller filters at the start of each run, so that way if anything does get into the line further upstream or shakes loose, there's that last line of defense before it actually goes into our emitters and risks plugging any of those. So once we have the filtration in, then we'll put in our manifold. So we need to make sure that we have a nice convenient place to set up any of the timers that'll open and close the valves through the irrigation system. So, and then from there we'll need to run lines out to each of the beds, tunnels, and perennial borders that we want to have irrigation on. So quite a bit to do. I don't know if all that will happen this fall, late summer or fall, but if not, it'll be something we'll get done early in the spring. Ideally, we'll get it done in the fall because the ground tends to be pretty wet in the spring, and it can delay when we get the irrigation in. And the way the weather works here in Western Washington is we usually have lots of rain, and then we get to late June, early July, and then we basically have no rain or very little until usually mid-September or so. So what ends up happening is the ground's really wet when we don't need irrigation, and then right away we're in an Indian irrigation, so there's a really pretty small window in the spring for putting in those irrigation lines without it just kind of being a whole bunch of extra work and a hassle. So ideally we'll get all those in, or at least the main ones in, this fall. It's high on my priority list, but there's lots of fall jobs adding up, so we'll see where the lands. We'll definitely do a video on that work once we get to that. So some people might want to know, how did the costs work out? So for us, we needed to run about 450 feet down the driveway and put in another transformer, and then about another 180 feet down here to our meter box. Altogether, I think it was about $6,700 to our power company, and then another $8.5 or so for the electricians to put in our meter bay here. The current setup is that we have a spot for a backup generator to go in, so if our power goes down, we can still run our pumps and whatnot. We have a little outlet here just for convenience while we get power hooked up to other areas. And then we have an RV hookup here, so if we want to plug in an RV, we can do that right there. And then we have a 300 and some amp service, so pretty good amount of power coming in here. So there was a decent cost in getting this initially set up. I'm not sure, some people might say maybe go with solar. We would like to bring in some solar panels in the future. Probably the idea would be, as a first step, having enough solar to run the pump. There's some batteryless systems now that would let you run your devices directly off of solar without having to necessarily run them through batteries first. That could be a good option for the irrigation, because when it's sunny, that's when we tend to need to irrigate. So there isn't a lot of cases where it's in the dark of winter and you're wanting to irrigate. And so here in Western Washington, one of the challenges we have with solar is that we have very dark winters. The sun doesn't even really come up much over the horizon, and in the middle of winter, you might I think sunrise is probably 8 or 9 o'clock, and sundown is 4, and quite a few of those hours are, it's arguably not really even daylight. It's just, dim, there's cloud cover. Sometimes it feels like it almost never gets light. And during that period, solar just doesn't work terribly well. And then by the time we would have put in a solar installation that was big enough to meet all of our needs and our long-term needs, it would have had to have been pretty big. So I think we ultimately would be in even more money now. Cost to operate our irrigation, we don't have everything set up yet, but doing quite a bit of watering, filling some tanks. I think that was about $4 in power based on the math I'm doing off the meter. So pretty economical, really. If we were getting that water from a municipal water source, it'd be much more expensive, maybe 10 times or more expensive. So this is a good solution for us, having the grid tie and the well. In terms of stability of the grid tie, we're pretty fortunate here. The main power lines go by probably a quarter mile to the side, and our whole area here is on underground power lines, so we don't really see many power outages up where we are. So there really isn't a big concern of power going out all the time. And we do have the backup generator, which we've been using for, 2 years now, and that's, it works. It's a little inconvenient, it's a little noisy. And the first few times we turned on our irrigation and we didn't have a motor going at the same time, it actually felt pretty weird. It was like, just the trickle of the water, and I have to say it's pretty nice being able to use the electric pumps over the gas pumps. But the gas pumps were reasonably economical. I think, we were probably burning because we use a non-ethanol fuel, so it's a little bit more expensive per gallon. And I'd say we were probably going through $100 to $170 during the peak of summer when we had a lot of watering to do. And that was both to bring water out of the well, which is actually the more the part that kind of used more gas, and then the irrigation pump that actually does the irrigating is pretty low fuel. I think it has approximately a 1 gallon tank on it, and that tank will last, probably usually a week. So that one really is pretty efficient. So if you had a good way to get the water out of the ground, or you had a natural spring, you could probably get a lot of your irrigation done off of one of these pumps without really spending much money. Now, there is the inconvenience of it running out of gas. Got to go over, fill it up. Of course, the noise, maintenance, but none of those things are really all that bad. If it means that you can have some water when you need it and your crops aren't dying. In the long run, we don't really want to rely a lot on irrigation, but because we're putting in so many new beds, it really is not an option to just not irrigate at all at this stage. Once these perennial beds are more established, then there'll be an opportunity to really tone back the amount of water that we're using here, particularly on perennial areas and trees, to almost nothing, maybe a little bit of water right in the middle of summer. Things are getting a little droughty, which will mean just a little water probably on drip lines most of the year for our tunnels and flower crops, and we do usually have some overhead sprinklers that we use while we're getting seeds established. Drip just doesn't really work very well for that. So the young plants and seeds get sprinklers, and then as soon as they're old enough to have some deeper roots, then we switch them over to drip. So that's the strategy we're following. Anyway, I wanted to give a little update on the power. This is a huge deal for us. We actually dug the original trench for bringing down the power line in March of 2020. And at that time, we really had trouble getting an electrician that would come out and help us. It was kind of one of those jobs that was sort of, big enough that it took some kind of experience to go do. And it wasn't trivial, but small enough that most electricians were busy enough with other things that they didn't really want to drop what they were doing and come out to our fairly remote property to bring in the line. So I called around to a bunch of different electricians, and pretty much nobody, a few people took my calls, but pretty much nobody really wanted to dig into it or knew exactly what needed to happen in our area. This isn't a super common kind of install. Usually they're putting it on a building or something, so it took a bit more research. Fortunately, our new neighbor was an electrician and was kind enough to help us out with this and face some of those headaches. So we really appreciate the work that he did and that he was able to fit us in. And so we ended up being, from when we started this project to now, given the delays through the winters and whatnot, I think the trenches and holes were open for over 800 days, maybe like 850 days. So being able to close all that up and have the power is man, it feels good. So anyway, that's my update for today. Hope everyone is doing well and growing lots of good things, ready for the fall to come in and maybe get a little bit of a break from the garden. Now's a good time to be ordering your garlic and tulips or anything else that you want to plant in the fall. We usually do that around November. Anyway, I think that's it for now. Leave a comment if you found any of this interesting or have any questions. Subscribe would really help. I'm trying to grow this channel. And anybody who subscribes is a big help for us. And click the bell for notifications, all the usual stuff. Really appreciate it, and we'll see y'all soon.